What does the 1966 Batman series, Game of Thrones, Community, Firefly, The Vampire Diaries, Knight Rider, Battlestar Galactica, Orange is the New Black, The Jeffersons, The Love Boat, Matt Kearney, all these book titles, and Indiana Jones's father all have in common? Well, at some point, they all reference the idiom, like ships passing in the night. And today we're going to take a look at the poem that we got that from. Welcome to a reading, summary, and analysis of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's The Ocean of Life. Now, for clarification's sake, I want to point out that these lines originally appear in the collection Tales of a Wayside Inn, specifically in the poem The Theologian's Tale, Elizabeth, which is quite a long poem. And originally they look like this somewhere in the middle of the poem. However, many editors have since taken these lines and used them to create their own poem called The Ocean of Life, which is often arranged on the page a little bit differently, and that's what I'll be analyzing in today's video. Ships that pass in the night and speak each other in passing, only a signal shown and a distant voice in the darkness. So in the ocean of life we pass and speak one another, only a look and a voice, then darkness again, and a silence. One thing that struck me as really interesting about this poem is that the idiom, ships that pass in the night, has become much more famous than the poem itself. I think most people have heard of this idiom, but they wouldn't be able to tell you where it comes from, and they probably don't know the title of this poem. I know I didn't know the title of this poem off the top of my head. So how is it that this became an idiom to begin with? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. First off, it's a really good poem. Even if it's just the first line that's really stuck, it's a really good first line. And it really summarizes the whole idea of the poem in this metaphor, that when ships are passing each other at night, they just show a signal in the darkness and then they move on. And in life, we go around all these people, maybe we say something, maybe we have a brief moment of connection, but then we move on into darkness and silence. And Longfellow employs a number of really interesting poetic devices to show this. For instance, you see that alliteration really highlights the ships, the passing, and the darkness. We can also tell by looking at the poem that it's intentionally laid out. It's very appealing looking on the page. The lines tend to be a little symmetrical looking. And yet, when you dive into the poem, the end of the lines are anything but symmetrical. They're not rhythmic at all. The only repetition in the poem is the darkness. Everything else is a little off or a little disjointed, just like the conversations and connections that fall apart in our lives. And one of my favorite things about the poem is the repetition of this long O sound, like in only and ocean. Now in English, the long O tends to have a melancholy feel to it. Think Ophelia's monologue, "Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown." You get the repetition of that long O and that very melancholy monologue. The other factor that can't be understated in this idiom taking root is the popularity of the poet. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is sometimes called America's first professional poet, and he was so popular that he has a bust in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. That is incredibly rare, especially for an American. I believe he's the first American, maybe even the only one, I'm not sure, but I believe he's the first American to get his bust there, but it's been a long time since I've been on a tour there, and I couldn't find any info to confirm or deny that, so those of you in England, let me know. Either way, he's a very popular poet, so it makes sense that he would have been well read in his lifetime and since then. But I think the biggest factor in this idiom's inception and continued use is just how interesting of a metaphor Longfellow's using in this poem. It's interesting how the metaphor's original image is one of two objects averting danger, and perhaps that's why we so often resonate with the passing ships in life. Human connection is dangerous, and yet there's a sadness to this poem, and by extension, the idiom when we use it. One of the longest studies ever done on happiness is the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It started in 1938 and followed 724 men when they were teenagers, including President John F. Kennedy. Since then, it's interviewed family members, and basically it's nearing 100 years of a single study looking at what makes people happy, all these different people from different backgrounds, and by extension, the people in their lives since. And the study comes to one huge conclusion. The thing that makes us the most happy in life is connections with each other. Romantic, familial, friendships, people in our lives that we care about and who care about us. And yet, it can be hard to make friends, and it can be even harder to keep friends when life starts moving us in different directions. But the poem seems to suggest that while in the ocean of life it's safer to avoid connection with one another, we know in our hearts that it's worth the risk.